In 1562, Diego de Landa, a Catholic bishop who was of the Archdiocese of the Yucatan, ordered something called an auto de fe against the Mayans. It was a collecting of their holy books and images and their outright destruction. Now, de Landa, being Catholic, believed that these images, these books, and indeed the Mayan religion in and of itself was a creation of the devil, and therefore had to be stomped out. I shudder to think what was lost in the fires. Strangely enough, de Landa did manage to preserve one codex, which is today known as the Dresden Codex. It is in fact in Dresden, Germany, in a museum where fortunately it survived the fires, the pyromaniac impulses of the local bishops, although de Landa's actions were looked at as excessive by some of his contemporaries, even including the brutal oppression of the locals, their jailing, their torture. Now, this was all part of the Inquisition. And the Inquisition was born in Spain much, much earlier, and de Landa was himself a Spaniard. And the Inquisition got its start not by attacking ethnic minorities in other countries, but rather by attacking ethnic and religious minorities in their own countries, in this case in predominantly Catholic Spain. For those who are unfamiliar with the history of Spain, it is up until very recently, and I mean very recently, even within the last 20 years, Spain has still been a country that has had major problems in terms of its fragmented society. People had already heard me describe the attitude of Castilians towards Grenadins, Grenadins towards Galicians, Catalans towards Castilians, the Basques towards everybody. And the crown of Spain got its start persecuting people religiously and ethnically by going after Jews and Muslims in Spain. And that's really where the teeth of the Inquisition were sharpened, and as it spread to all parts of Europe, they began looking at other minorities, particularly women who perhaps were adherents to old pagan ways in terms of treating disease and things of this nature. That is the legacy of the Inquisition in Europe, and they exported that kind of zeal into the Americas. And this was the kind of thing that many of the indigenous people of South and Central America faced all the way to today. Linked in the low bar will be an article concerning a young lady in, I believe it is in Minnesota. She is one of the native tribes there, and she was in school, and she said "I love you" to two of her classmates in her native language. She was promptly suspended from the basketball team for a game and reprimanded in front of the entire class for speaking her native tongue. This happens today, folks, and the legacy of this is linked to the exportation of Christianity into our modern day. And it doesn't just happen to the ethnic minorities of this country. Think of all the other minorities that Christianity uses its tenets to ostracize and to marginalize: homosexuals, transgender people, even people of African descent or of native descent. Do not forget that it was the Bible that was the impetus for the Dixiecrats' claim to be able to own people as property. They believed it biblically correct. Therefore, if it was biblically correct, it was ordained and sanctioned by God. And of course, God did not appear to clear the matter up. Therefore, it was carried forward with all the zeal of an Inquisition, just as it had been for many hundreds of years. And this is where we come to the slippery legacy of the Inquisition and of religion. Now, it is true also, many of those same religious organizations later went on to fight slavery. But, and this is something that has always been present in our culture, it has always been in the auspices of making people in their image, regardless of whether or not they're fighting for their freedom. I think one of the best examples of this was the name of a gentleman, an Englishman named Morel in the Belgium Congo, who fought to stop the oppression of the local Congo people. But Morel was a product of his time also. He believed in concepts of free trade as set forward by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. He didn't see the kind of exploitation that was happening by the British of native peoples in Africa also. He tended to overlook that. It is a contradiction that we all have to come to terms with. That being said, we had little to do with those things that have happened in the past. In fact, in most cases, we rarely, if ever, have a direct responsibility to these things. What we do have a direct responsibility to, and this is how I hope will help Divinity in her search, we do have a responsibility to tell the truth about those times. There are countless instances of Indian agents trying to spread Christianity to the native peoples, withholding food, withholding medicine, saying all you have to do is convert and all this has to end. An emotional and spiritual blackmail to force people into a situation where they have to choose between life and death. And life means accepting the culture and God of an alien people who have done nothing to that point but murder your citizens, wipe out your families, bring disease, steal the land, and make your life miserable. And yet starving to death doesn't seem like a great alternative either. This is the legacy of the Christian religion in this country. Like all things, it's the dichotomy of the yin and the yang, the good and the bad. It was Quakers and missionaries and other people who did seek to end something like the slave trade. But they were also the same people that persecuted with such zeal the native peoples' cultures and beliefs. Now, the U.S. government used this manifest destiny concept to push people west and to start pushing the native people off the land. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I've often wondered about the motivations of the U.S. government when they started to push west. I've often come to suspect that many understood when they started to push settlers into the territories that now new Native American cultures and new Native peoples had been forced into from further east, that they were going to provoke conflict and give them the excuse they needed to move into the area militarily. Now, because of what was going on with slavery, it was too contentious at the time, before the Missouri Compromise, to necessarily move in there. Of course, John Tyler made sure that mess got screwed up real good, and after the Civil War, there was suddenly no reason for them not to move in. They weren't threatened by secession by the Dixiecrats anymore. The Dixiecrats have been broken as a power, and they've still, to this day, lay broken before the altar of history. And they pushed into the West and subjugated the native peoples they found there. Then, in one of the more brilliant annexations in the history of America, we used, before the Civil War, the dust-up between Santa Anna and the Texans as an excuse to annex Texas, California, New Mexico, those areas. And before that, they had all been either the people, the Apache and the Comanche, the lands of the Dene and the Hopi, who, by the way, as Jasmine reminded me, they speak one of those Aztec-derived languages, the Nahuatl-derived languages all the way up here in America. So these people were everywhere, all over the Southwest. We pushed into their lands, pushed them out. We took what we wanted, and we left them only with the worst scraps. In fact, the Dene ended up moving on to the Black Mesa, which is a very desolate no man's land that has very little in it. There is freshwater springs, but as I described in another video, the Peabody Coal Company was using those springs to create coal slurry and essentially rob them of their drinking water. To make matters worse, the Hopi and the Dene were traditional enemies of one another. In fact, the word Anasazi is a Dene word that means ancient enemy, and it derives from the ancestors of the Hopi that they called Anasazi, the ancient enemy. Now, in more recent times, the Hopi and the Dene, the modern Navajo, have banded together and begun to reassert themselves as a people. And as Divinity pointed out, we have a third world right here in this country. All you have to do is go on to any Indian reservation, and you are back in the third world. It is a miscarriage of justice, but it was made possible by the spread of Christianity. Christianity was the tool of the clever and of the ambitious to gain a foothold into parts of this country where otherwise it would just have looked like naked aggression. The best form of colonialism is colonialism in the guise of self-defense. People started to move into this country. People started to move into the West. People started to move into the East during the aforementioned expansion of the colonies. And, of course, they came into conflict with the native people who were there first. But because they were heathens, because they did not have the true revealed religion, and because they were attacking people that were looked at as innocent civilians, and may very well have been innocent civilians, but they were in someone else's territory, they used that as an impetus of self-defense to go into these countries and seize the land. It's made possible by ideas of Christian identity or European identity. And it made it much, much easier for this fledgling nation to begin to annex all the territory that they sought. Ironically, it's more territory than anybody could know what to do with at that time. And it really does sort of speak to European greed, because so much of our identity is tied up at times in our material possession. But we should make no mistake of it, Christianity was the lubricant that did do this, and this is exactly what Divinity said in another video. It can't happen without the impetus of spreading God's word. You don't have the zealous soldiers. You don't have the unscrupulous politicians looking to exploit in some other way. Otherwise, it would have had to have been naked aggression, and many other countries in Europe wouldn't have accepted that. Or they would have simply tried to make a grab for themselves without regard to anybody's rights in the situation, including other Europeans' rights. It's connected to politics. It's connected to the old balances of power. It's connected to the old hard grievances, especially between Catholic France and Protestant England. So much of what we're talking about really is wrapped up in what happened in the years before the Revolution, during the 7 Years' War, which is called the French and Indian War on this continent. It really is just an extension of the 7 Years' War in Europe. All this is connected, and it goes farther back than anybody can realize. But I thoroughly believe it is not possible without the use of religion to create the social impetus, the social idea to move forward and subjugate a people. But you're not doing it to hurt them, you're doing it to save their souls. And of course, what could be more noble than saving souls? What could be more noble than bringing the revealed religion to people who would otherwise go to hell? You have to save them. It's your Christian duty, even if you kill them in the process. The taint of causing their death is less than the taint of allowing their souls to burn in hell. It is a powerful message, and it is a message that I'm sure many of them believed. I know many of them believed it. But in trying to put the message out, they found themselves doing things that were actually absolutely contrary to the message, but they managed to rationalize it in their own minds. But Christianity is largely responsible for that, be it Catholicism or Protestantism, and it still continues to do so today. Thanks and good night.